All right, for today's next step, we're going to be learning how to create what is called a glaze of color. And the glaze of color that we're going to make is transparent. So that way we're going to paint it on this whole background collage, and the collage will still show through it because it's transparent and see-through, but it's going to sort of give a tone and a tint to this background, so it's not just the colors of the pages. You will need your acrylic paints and your Mod Podge, a paper towel, the biggest paintbrush that you've got, water cup, and a container to put your paints in. Now, to choose your colors of acrylics, pick 1, 2, or possibly 3 different colors that you think look nice together and mix well. And you can test this out on a scrap sheet of paper if you start mixing them together to see if they make pretty colors. For example, I would not choose complementary colors or opposites on the color wheel. But we're going to be taking those colors and mixing them with our Mod Podge to create a transparent glaze. So to start, I'm going to take a little bit of my Mod Podge and put it into a container. And next, I'm also going to add my paint colors to another section of my tray or a separate tray. I'm going to be using a periwinkle blue, a light teal, and a little bit of white in case those colors look too dark and I need to lighten them any. And with your paintbrush, the biggest one that you've got, make sure that it's wet before you begin. Dab any extra moisture off with a paper towel. We don't necessarily want to thin this down with water. We want to thin it down with the Mod Podge. And so now I'm going to take just a small amount of my first color that I want to use and mix that into a much larger amount of my Mod Podge. I'm using a pretty high ratio of the Mod Podge, and this is going to basically spread out the colored pigments, allowing them to become more transparent because we have that filler of the clear Mod Podge in the mixture. Now, if you're using a dark color, make sure you add plenty of Mod Podge so it's not too dark, but just a little bit of paint color and a lot of Mod Podge, and it's going to create this really cool transparent glaze. And so now I'm going to start brushing that on, and you can see that you can still see the color, the textures, and the writing behind it. Now, if you start brushing this on and you notice that it's opaque, you can't see through it and you can't see your collage, it's okay, just add a little bit more Mod Podge into your mixture until you get the right ratio where it is see-through. The more paint you add, the more opaque it will be. The more Mod Podge you add, the more transparent it will be. And we do want this to be fairly transparent, but just give the whole thing a tone. And I'm not being particularly neat with this. In fact, I sort of like the brush strokes. It looks very painterly. So this part's kind of fun and it's really fast. So don't be too perfect with it. Now, if you decide that anything is too opaque, you can thin it out with some extra Mod Podge. And that looks pretty good. So now that whole board is sort of toned with that really light blue color. Now, since I am doing an analogous color scheme, I can kind of play around with the colors a little bit. If I want, I'm doing blues, blue greens, and greens. If I want to add a little touch of my teal, I can do that too. I'm just going to add it to some Mod Podge just to make this a little bit more interesting. You want to be careful doing that with complementary colors, because if you mix complementary colors together, they will turn desaturated and sort of turn to a brown. So this works well if you're doing analogous or colors beside one another. Blue and blue green work really well. So just adding that like little bit gives it just a little subtle shift between blues and blue-greens, but it's all really light, and it's all see-through, so I can still see all of my collage underneath it. Now once everything is completely dry and you've had time to clean up your paints, you can take your cutout stencil design and line that up on your collage where it fits. So mine is a vertical composition, so I've got everything lined up there. You can also use the negative space pieces that you saved to help you line up any smaller unattached sections like my smaller leaves and pieces. And then you're going to be using a ballpoint pen. I just like the really inexpensive Bic rollerball pen to do this, and very carefully you're going to go through and trace the outlines of that stencil onto the page. Now a ballpoint pen like this is one of the only things I found that transfers to the Mod Podge surface, especially if you have the glossy Mod Podge. A pencil and things like that tend to not transfer very well. And I also don't want a line as harsh or as bold as, say, like a Sharpie. This is a much finer, more delicate, much lighter line, and it's going to be more subtle, which is what we want for this project. So make sure that you're using like a round stick pen, ballpoint pen for this. And just very, very carefully speed through and trace all of those shapes, making sure everything stays lined up. Now once you finish tracing everything, if you have any of the small captured negatives that were not cut out, you can go back in and draw those by hand, referencing your original stencil. And then after that, you are going to very carefully make sure that you save those stencil pieces. We're going to be using those for something later on, so make sure not to throw them away. And that completes our assignment for today.